Hello and welcome. Tonight we are going to be reading ghost stories and talking about doppelganger, which are the ghostly doubles of living people. The notion of double walkers have proven to be both fascinating and chilling to humans across time and cultures. And we are going to look into various examples from folklore, references from film and television, and real first-hand sightings. These stories, which will be peppered throughout the program, come from the website Your Ghost Stories. They are presented as real, personal, paranormal accounts, but you can decide for yourself. I've put timestamps on the video if you want to skip around through the stories and different topics. So, let's get started. Let's read a short one to kick things off. It comes from username PromGhost07 in Oregon, and it's called Identical Woman. This happened to my mom, not me. My mom was going to a restaurant with her buds. As she was about to walk in, she turned her head to the right and saw a woman that looked exactly like her. The identical woman turned a block, so my mom followed right behind her. The woman turned into an alley. My mom did the same. But when my mom turned into the same alley, the woman was gone. There were no doors or places for the woman to hide, and it was a dead end. My mom hasn't seen her since. The phrase doppelgänger comes from a German word meaning double walker or double goer. It is difficult to find information on the origin of the phrase and how these legends traveled from Germany and became more widely known. It is my understanding that a doppelganger is an exact duplicate of a living person, like an identical twin. However, a doppelganger is not a physical person. Rather, they are a spiritual copy, sort of like a ghost or apparition. Witnessing a doppelganger, either of yourself or of another person, is generally regarded as a spooky and ominous experience, and an omen of impending death. Doppelganger are usually regarded as negative entities, an evil twin of sorts, and are regarded as dangerous or frightening beings. They are featured heavily in film and literature. One example is David Lynch's television show, Twin Peaks. Doubles appear of several characters, physically identical to them except for milky blue-white eyes and malicious grins. Screaming, cackling, and taunting, these terrifying beings are briefly referred to as dwellers on the threshold and shadow selves. In folklore, a marked difference between a person and their doppelganger is that the double does not cast a shadow. Let's read another story. This one is by user Fairylike from North Carolina. It's called Haunted House and Doppelgangers on Hancock Street. When I was 11, my family decided to move to an old house in Oxford, North Carolina. It was constructed in the early 1900s and had been added on to throughout the years. My sister Tara and I loved it. My little brother Eric was too small to care. The strange stuff started happening almost immediately. It was to be the first night we were going to stay in the house, and we had already mostly moved in. My mom was cleaning and dusting the kitchen and unpacking, while my dad was out picking up another load from the old house. I was riding my bike up and down the sidewalk. Upon passing one time, I looked through the wispy curtains into the house and could see my mom placing a fancy porcelain soup dish on the dining room table. My stomach rumbled. I rode my bike down the driveway and stashed it in the garage. I ran in one of the back doors into the kitchen and grabbed a bowl and spoon from the drainer. My mom asked what I was doing. I told her I was getting some soup. She asked, "What soup?" as I pushed through the swinging door into the dining room, only to find it still empty. The table wasn't even in the house yet. I told my mom what happened, and she said maybe we had a ghost welcoming us home. After that, we had a series of strange instances, what can only be described as a doppelganger. Everyone in the house would experience someone in the house calling them. Only the person who had done the calling either wasn't there or hadn't really done the calling. My parents still experience this, even now that my sister and I no longer live there. It mainly occurs right before we show up for a visit, too. Another instance of the doppelganger was when my sister and I were waiting for one of our parents to get home for work so we could go out for the night. My sister and her friends were hanging out in the front yard, and my boyfriend and I were hanging out in my bedroom. We heard my dad pull in the driveway. I saw the headlights and heard the music blasting and everything. So we headed out to the front yard and waited. And we waited and waited for my dad to come out. I peeked down the driveway, thinking maybe he was finishing listening to a song or something. Lo and behold, there was no car in the driveway. All of us kids kind of freaked out, and just as we were all in the driveway exclaiming to one another, my dad pulled up for real. A very interesting story, rather, a handful of stories, from Fairy Like. This user is quite prolific on the Your Ghost Stories website. The link to the story is included in the source list in the description of the video, if you want to read more of their paranormal accounts. Speaking of fairies, the Celtic peoples have their own legend of doubles, and they are all related to fairies. In the book Letters on Demonology and Witchcraft by Sir Walter Scott, he says that, quote, double men are found among the fairy race, corresponding with mortals existing on Earth, end quote. Sometimes fairies will steal a human child and replace it with a seemingly identical fairy baby, which are called changelings. A passage from the book British Goblins by Wirt Sykes says, quote, the changeling has the exact appearance of the stolen infant at first, but its aspect speedily alters. It grows ugly of face, shriveled of form, ill-tempered, wailing, and generally frightful, end quote. Although the notions of changelings have become romanticized in modern times, their origins reveal that babies thought of as changelings were actually just born with disabilities. A being in Irish folklore that more resembles the German doppelganger is called the fetch. The fetch is an exact physical double of a person, and an omen of that person's death. The double may even forbade the cause of death. For example, bearing burns if the individual is to die in a fire. Often, though, it isn't seen directly at all, but only in the corner of one's eyes, as a shadowy figure. Let's move on to our next story. It's by Into the Airwaves, and it's called Something Mimicked My Mother in the Woods. This incident occurred sometime in the fall of 2006. I grew up in a rural part of Ohio. My house had fairly dense woods located directly behind it. As a child, I had a passion for exploring. I especially loved exploring those woods. It was my favorite place to be. Prior to the incident, I had wandered through those woods many times, always with my mother's permission. There was one tree in particular that I frequently enjoyed climbing, usually about to the halfway mark, so I could perch myself on one of the heavier branches and just relax as I listened to the peaceful sounds of nature. From that position, I could partially see the back of my house. On that day, after a fair amount of exploring, I carefully scaled my favorite tree. I seated myself on a sturdy branch and took in the view. It was late October, and the sun was beginning to set. When darkness would begin to fall, my mother would stand at the edge of the woods and call my name until I obediently returned home, so as not to be stranded out there after dark. After watching the sun set until I could no longer see it, I began my descent down the tree. I was nearly at the bottom when I heard my mother's familiar voice, calling my name. I thought nothing of it at first, as this routine had occurred plenty of times before. Then I realized something strange as my feet touched the ground. My mother's voice was coming from behind me, deeper in the woods, rather than towards the direction of my house. My mom had never entered those woods before, at least not with me. I was eager to find her and show her all of my favorite spots before it grew too dark. That's when I realized something was off. How could she have gone into the woods ahead of me? Certainly I could have missed her, but as I said, she never entered those woods. She continued calling my name, but there was something strange about it. She sounded absolutely frantic, almost angry. Fearing that I was in trouble for reasons currently unknown, I froze in place. As her voice drew closer, I squinted my eyes to see if I could locate her and determine exactly how angry or upset she appeared to be. However, I didn't see anyone or anything unusual. Suddenly, I heard her voice calling my name from the direction of my house, sounding much calmer. Seconds later, from somewhere within the woods yet again, it wasn't an echo. I wasn't imagining things. I was hearing her beckoning me from the edge of our backyard as well as ahead of me. My legs suddenly turned to jelly.
Come here right now.
The voice that I originally believed to be her screamed from just ahead. I realized that whoever or whatever was mimicking my mother was drawing closer. Terrified of what I would see if I stood there much longer, I turned around and ran towards my house as quickly as I could. From behind me, the other voice continued to call my name, now sounding desperate. Panic set in as my actual mother finally came into view, waiting patiently as she usually did until I returned home. In my frightened state, I absolutely refused to look back. As soon as I was out of the woods and in the backyard next to my mother, the other voice was suddenly gone. Rather than fading away, it seemed to stop the very moment I stepped foot into my backyard. I must have looked as frightened as I felt, because my mother asked me what was wrong. I didn't say anything until we were safely inside the house, with our doors locked. I asked my mother if she had entered the woods. Appearing confused by the question, she told me that of course she hadn't. I hesitantly asked her if she had heard anyone else calling my name and yelling. The answer to that question was also no. The incident in those woods has stayed with me to this day. I can still hear that voice as clear as a bell. Whoever or whatever it was calling my name sounded exactly like my mother, but I know it wasn't her. I found that story to be pretty unnerving. I wonder what the author would have seen if they had followed the voice deeper into the woods. I thought it was interesting that this was an instance of a doppelganger only by voice. If you could talk to your own doppelganger, would you? Well, in a way, you can. Urban legends about doppelganger numbers are common in Japan. Phone numbers you can call and talk to your doppelganger, who, of course, sounds just like you and repeats what you say back to you. Several doppelganger numbers exist in Japan, and there's even one in the United States. In fact, they probably exist in every country because these doppelganger numbers of legend are real. And while it may be an unnerving experience for some, there's actually nothing supernatural about it. These phone numbers are called echo tests, and they are just used to test the audio quality of your phone. So if you call an echo test number, you will hear an echo of your own voice, but it's not your doppelganger. That is, unless the voice on the other end stops echoing your words and starts speaking on its own, as the urban legends suggest. With that, let's now read the final story of the night. This one is by user Moonchild, and it's called Strange Encounter with an Entity. Recently, I have been experiencing a strange interaction with a spiritual entity. The first encounter, I was washing some coolers outside when I heard a monotone whistle, which was coming from my boyfriend's yard, who lives across the street from me. I looked over and felt as if everything was spinning. I saw what I believed was my boyfriend standing on his porch staring at me, but his face was blurred out. After reaching inside and closing the door, the spinning stopped. Upon questioning my boyfriend about the situation, he claimed no one else was home at the time and he was asleep inside. About 2 months later, I was outside setting up some decorations when I heard the same monotone whistling and footsteps in his yard. I turned and there was no one there. Upon asking him again, he told me he was working in his attic at the time and no one was outside. I haven't had any more encounters since then, but there are days when I can hear the same whistling right outside my bedroom window, and the more I ignore it, the louder it gets. My boyfriend has also told me he has seen me outside at times when I wasn't, and that I would look directly at him and smile. He would be standing by a window, and I usually don't just stare at his house or windows like that. He has also mentioned that he would sometimes hear me calling him outside at 3 a.m, almost as if I'm trying to lure him out of the house. That's all I have for you tonight. There's something very frightening to us about doubles. Something so sinister that many cultures feel to behold one is an omen of death. Is it really so scary to see a second version of yourself? I mean, you see one every day in the mirror. That is you, right? Until next time.
Let's see it.